I'm very excited to welcome Sven Pape to the show today. Sven's an editor who's worked with James Cameron and many others. I met Sven at NAB more than, I guess, half a dozen years ago and have followed him since before he launched his website, thisguyedits.com. Among other things, what for me has always separated Sven from many others who are on the web as purveyors of editorial training is where others were talking often about how to operate the editing systems. Sven's always concentrated on the how and why of actual editing, how to select scenes, order them, trim them, how to maintain character arcs, story pace, the things that pushing the buttons enable, but things that go beyond the how to operate the NLE and instead dives deeper into how to make great choices to advance what really makes a great editor, their storytelling skills. So Sven, welcome to Office Hours. Good to see you.
It's good to be here.
It's great to see you. Today, you've got more than 500,000 subscribers to your YouTube channel, but it's been a journey. Why don't you take us back a little bit and tell us a little bit about how you started This Guy Edits?
So I started in 2016. I was working as an editor, and my little daughter was kind of in elementary school, and she was running a YouTube channel about My Little Ponies. And I taught her a little bit of
big time. My Little Pony. It's a global phenomenon.
It was. She was one of the top 10 MOP creators and was making money. And I was like, wow, I have to take this medium seriously. And she was buying her own camera, her own lights, all that stuff. So I pitched this idea to my director that I was cutting a feature film on and said, we need to show the editing process. And he's like, show me a couple of episodes. And while he was shooting in Pennsylvania and the footage was coming in, I was like, the first episode is me opening up the FedEx box, getting the footage into the system and starting to cut. And that was the beginning of the channel. And since then, we've been pivoted towards more mainstream content. Did some videos on Christopher Nolan is always doing very well on the channel, and really kind of developed not just a YouTube channel, but a whole ecosphere behind it that has online training, coaching, all kinds of stuff going on.
When I've watched your instructional videos, they're extremely practical. This has been kind of, I think, a hallmark of yours. You show an editing or storytelling challenge, you explain your thinking about what can be improved, then show the audience how to actually change things to improve those results. Was that your kind of original formula to really break it down and be practical about how to achieve these things?
That took me a minute. So at the beginning, I was just showing the process of how I cut things without really thinking about, is this educational or whatever? I thought it was more like a let's play format. PewDiePie was really big back then. He was playing computer games. And I thought to myself, well, it's the same thing, playing a computer game and cutting a movie. It turned out it wasn't. It's quite boring. And then I thought more about, okay, what is it that people can really sort of gain from this? And the first video where I really sort of implemented that idea of what could I teach about editing was about Walter Murch and his concept of cutting to the eyes, to the blinking of an eye.
Yeah, blink of an eye.
Cutting a scene. And I was showing the audience how I would really pay attention to how the actors would blink to determine when I would be cutting, because the theory is when they blink, they finish a thought. And if you cut before, but if you cut earlier, you're cutting off the thought, and then the audience is going to be more confused. They're going to be less empathizing with this character. And so that was kind of the first educational video that I posted. And I reached out to a bunch of film blogs, No Film School back then was really, really hot. And they picked up this video, and then overnight I suddenly had 3,000 more subscribers and got instead of a couple thousand views, suddenly I had 20,000 views. And then I realized, oh, okay, so this is what it's about. It's sharing insights on kind of how to tell a story creatively, and then I sort of evolved from there.
Can you take a second, for those people who are here today who are editors and want to learn some things, can you take a second to describe your pre-edit process? If you get a script and you're thinking about how you're going to approach this, what are the things you think about? Is it identifying story arcs and key moments and things like that? Or is there anything special that you do that you look at the script and say, I want to get my mind around how I should approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I do. When I have the opportunity to read the script before they shoot, I actually, if the director is open to the idea, I actually give them thoughts on it. Right now, I'm actually working with a director who's writing a script, and he's sending me a couple of pages every now and then. And the things that I really look for is, first of all, is a scene dramatic? Does it have a dramatic question, which is often the will something happen? Like if you don't have that in a scene, chances are the scene is kind of episodical or boring. Or if you can like without that, often you can remove that scene and it wouldn't affect the rest of the film. So these are kind of things that I really pay attention to, because when I'm cutting, I'm the ambassador of the audience, and my number one job is to want the audience to be right there, like what's going to happen next. And sometimes directors, if they like, for whatever reasons, they create scenes for whatever reasons they create, but they might not think about the audience necessarily first. So I'll do that. I'll look for like exposition, our characters saying things just so that the audience has information. And I'm like, do we really need to tell the audience this? Or what would happen if we don't tell them this at all? Would they be so confused that they'd be running out of the theater? So I'd be noting anything like that, coincidences, things just happen conveniently. So it's a little bit of a reality check at that stage. If it's already shot and done, I really don't look at that script all that much. I might read it once to sort of get the job or have a creative talk with the director. But during the editing process, I rarely look at the script. I just respond to the footage and try to tell the story that's within the footage.
I'm curious a little about relationships with directors. How do you know how much to push, when to pull back? Do you get a sense of the person, and how important is that in terms of establishing the working relationship?
It's super important that you don't do this right away with a new director. So I always build rapport first. So I'll be less critical maybe, or less honest in a way when I work with a new director. And I first want to really build a lot of goodwill. So I'll show them more like very polished scenes at the beginning of a relationship, where I like spend extra time on just making sure that it's really screenable. That it feels like it's ready to be in a theater. And then once I have them like, okay, we're in good place, this is going to work out, then I might take a little bit less of that polished approach and like include more things just to explore things. It's really important at the beginning to also make sure that the director is part of this creative process. So even though I have a very kind of firm point of view on a film, and my editor's cut is often wildly different from what's in the script, it's not necessarily the first version that I'll show to the director. I usually cut my version first and I put it aside, and then I cut what I call the kitchen sink cut, which is like very faithful to the script, every line, everything in there, how I think the director intended it to be. Show that scene first to the director. And then often what happens is like, oh my God, we have a problem. We need to fix it. Or this is way too long, whatever it is. Then I'm like, okay, let me show you this other version. And then usually what happens most of the time is the director says, oh, okay. Why don't we start with this version and work on that? And so those are some strategies that I use specifically with new directors. But like the movie that I'm supposedly working on right now with Mark Webber, this is going to be our fourth film together. So we can take a lot more shortcuts. Like he doesn't need to see a kitchen sink version of his film.
Great hints. So new relationships, show them more, get them excited, get them to feel confident about you, and then you can relax and go to the more aesthetic things that might not be so easy to demonstrate to them. Fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about your experiences in building out your YouTube channel? I mean, obviously, if you had to go back to square one, what would you prioritize now compared to what you did when you first started? What are the lessons you've learned in building a big YouTube audience?
I mean, I got very lucky at the beginning because I already was kind of mentored by people that were doing it very successfully. I was part of what was called the Jump Cut Academy, and it was like a bunch of YouTubers that had 1 million+ subscribers that were building kind of the first online course. And somehow I got an email and I signed up for it, and it came at the right time for me. So I already kind of had a big picture vision of what I'm supposed to be doing before I even kind of knew what this is. like really understanding that YouTube is not the end goal, for example. It's really just like access to an audience, but you need to find ways to bring that audience with you to another platform, what to do with a sponsorship deal, how to approach film blogs to like get articles about your videos, all these kind of stuffs I didn't know about, but was able to basically just copy and mirror based on what they were sort of teaching. And it really, really helped me. Now, would I change something? I mean, I'd love to post more content more consistently and figure out how to build an infrastructure that allows me to do that by hiring more editors and a producer. That took a very long time because the quality of the videos, I always felt like was very hard to accomplish if I would be hiring out the editing portion of it. But I really had to, like in the last year, really, I had to really like focus on finding the right editors, finding a really good producer and helping with that. And we're now kind of really buckling down on consistent content. Like I was never very consistent. But it didn't really matter back then, but now it seems to matter way more for the algorithm.
Going to open it up to the panelist question here in just a second. One last little thing. You just have something new going on with Spotify. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
Yeah, so we're running currently a pilot program that's only available in the UK. Spotify is going into online education. So if you are in the UK, you can use your Spotify app and you can actually do courses, online courses on it. And it's video, it's audio and video. And what's really interesting about that opportunity is that obviously Spotify has, 500 million people worldwide that are subscribed, that they have a pretty good idea who would be right for your course. In my case, it would be online editing, creative, dramatic, narrative, that kind of stuff, based on the podcasts that they're listening on Spotify. So then they basically take care of reaching out to those people and providing courses. So initially, they started this as a very small group, and I was lucky that my course is on Thinkific, which is like a leading online learning platform. And so Spotify and Thinkific are kind of the showrunners behind this idea. And I found myself in a meeting with one of the founders of Spotify at some point where they were like, hey, we're interested in doing this with Spotify. Can we have one of your courses to try this out? I'm like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, please. That's great. Let's open it up to the other panelists. Alex, you have your hand raised.
Hey, it's great to have you here. A couple questions. One is, can you tell us a little about your tools? What's your tool set for putting these together?
Yeah, so for YouTube, I've primarily cut on Final Cut, and all the editors that I work with, we have about 3 or 4 editors. We really sort of want them to be good in Final Cut because we just like the speed of it. It's very intuitive, very fast. We do that. We use Frame.io for notes, that kind of stuff. We use Discord a lot for communication. So yeah, those are the primary tools, I would say.
And when you're working with your editors, what kind of guidance are you giving them to get the feel that you're looking for?
Yeah, it takes a minute to get them there. So I show them reference videos of what this new video is, what the format is. They'll do a first cut, and then I'll give them a lot of notes. At the beginning, it's a lot of small stuff. A lot of the young editors don't know what title safe is, for example. So one of the very first notes is like, make sure the title is safe. And Google what action safe versus title safe is, because they don't know that these videos on YouTube still play on a television set. Like 20-30% of all YouTube is being watched on a TV set. So the titles have to be good. That's one of an early note. Sound, audio pops, all this basic stuff. But once they sort of find that rhythm, it's really about the storytelling. Can they really understand the pacing, the way we package a video where it's kind of entertainment and education? Oftentimes I find that these young editors are actually much better at cutting for YouTube because their pacing is better.
And what makes their pacing better?
They are very used to like stimulation, refresh, retention, these kind of things. Like they get bored very easily. So they cut videos that are less boring.
We need a make less boring button.
Yeah, no. I think it is really important. I talk to a lot of creators that have that. If you bring in an experienced editor, they'll sit on something a lot longer because they want it to mature or whatever. And a younger editor will be just like, okay, I got to move on to the next thing, or I got to pop something, or I got to move something over, right?
Yeah. Usually I'm the one that needs to slow things down. So the final pass, I still always do, and then I'll put more breath in these kind of things. But it's really good. I'd rather have them be faster than too slow. That's deadly when an editor doesn't understand pacing and it's like everything's just dragged out.
Yeah, we often say that one of the reasons I work with a lot of hosts, and almost all the hosts exhibit the traits of ADHD. Like almost all of them. If you go to a dinner with them, they're all just, it's like popcorn going everywhere, and I realize it's because what makes them good hosts is because they get bored before the audience does. Like they want to keep moving the show forward. What's your posting strategy? As you is there a certain time? What's the frequency?
Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring it out again. So I used to post on a Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to really work for my audience, time zone wise, and so on. We're trying to do a video every 2 weeks right now. We want to get to one video a week. That's what we're working towards.
And do you, when you think of the great editors, what are the movies or pieces that you really think of like that is some amazing editing?
I mean, there's so many. Thelma Schoonmaker is a huge idol of mine. I really love, she's Martin Scorsese's editor. I really love how ruthless she is with scenes. She just does not care about continuity editing at all. And when you watch it, you don't notice it. But if you stop the film and look frame by frame and you look at every cut, you realize the arms the people are wearing different clothes. It's all over the place. But because she has such a great understanding of emotion, you as an audience member, there's no way you're noticing any of this. And she's prioritizing that heavily. So I really love that. And yeah, I find that very deliberating for my own work. But there's so many other great editors.
What's your opinion when the edit becomes part of the show? So there's the kind of the invisible edit that you're watching a story occur and things can go, and then you have something like Man on Fire where the edit is the show, is part of the show. I mean, part of the movie is how it's being edited and how it's being jerked around and moved around, and they're creating that energy and creating a certain feel with the edit. And how do you, when you think about that, how do you compare those, or what's your preference and how do you look at that?
Well, I mean, I would probably say I prefer invisible editing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I always say it's substance over style. Style should only be dictated by the constraints of the story. So if for example, Spring Breakers is a very stylistic movie editing wise, but it makes complete sense because they're kind of in this druggy world and they're young and have very intense experiences. And so I love that stylistic in-your-face editing. Requiem for a Dream, same idea. But most of the time, I would say the go-to should be the invisible editing, where it doesn't get in the way of the story. So that would be, but I'm open to it when it's applied well, when it makes sense.
We're talking a little bit about the fact that the audience has changed a little bit. Do you think attention spans are getting shorter? And is there still time to let that scene breathe without losing momentum?
I do think you can still let scenes breathe, even on YouTube. There's a lot of great creators who don't do retention editing or trying to be super on point. They still have really good pacing in terms of how a story evolves, how the emotional journey is for the audience. And yes, I think people probably get it faster. But as soon as you tell a really compelling story, something that is authentic and emotionally engaging, you have all the time in the world. And you should not shortchange that when you're cutting. You shouldn't, because you probably might ruin it, actually. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I see that in the movies I sometimes watch in the theater. I particularly action movies, they're so anxious to get to the next something happening that they don't give you time to think about what the character just experienced here and there. So I guess that's always, how do you feel your way through that? Is there some technique you use, or is it just a sense of, I really need to let this linger a little bit?
Well, I mean, I have an idea. Like, that's what editors get paid for, to have an idea how the audience is going to feel. So I'll put that out there. First, I'll pitch it to the director. We kind of figure it out. We massage it. And then when it goes to the first couple of screenings, usually for us, because we're indie filmmakers, it's the festival premiere and then like 2 more screenings in that festival. I tend to just sit with the audience in the back. I don't sit with the crew, and I just pick up their energy. And by just sort of really taking all that in, I get so many new ideas that often I walk out of a screening like this, and afterwards I start writing everything down. And I have like 50 changes that I want to make to the film based on.
That's fascinating. So you really pick up on that first viewing of others and then understand how your work is affecting that variety of different people. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So I would notice, and it's good to have a couple of screenings so you can see if it repeats or if it's like a one-off. It's kind of like a theater performance. Every audience is slightly different how they perceive a film, which has to do with their own energy. Like, how do they go into the film? Are they ready? Do they like this? Whatever. Do they know anything? So seeing it a couple of times with an audience, I can really focus on, okay, this joke that I thought was funny is not funny. It's just not played. Or this thing that I didn't realize was funny is actually funny, and we can make it even better. So yeah, I make a lot of changes based on watching my own stuff with somebody else and just like sitting slightly behind them and just absorbing the energy. It's not like I'm not watching them. I'm not taking any notes. I'm just feeling something, and it feels different when the person next to me is experiencing this movie for the first time.
Nice.
Do you ever find that people will step over things that you don't even, that you put in there? Like, for instance, I used to work at Lucasfilm, and we used to talk about the fact that when the stormtrooper hit his head on the entering it, that most people don't realize that the stormtrooper hit his head, but Ben Burtt added a sound effect. Like, it wasn't like they left it in there, and most people, because, to your point, because everyone was so caught up in the story, it just was completely filtered out by 99% of the audience.
I didn't notice it when I was watching the movie.
Yeah.
And
I didn't notice until I was working on Star Wars. And they were like, oh, that's just like the helmet hitting the head. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they were like, oh, we're going to have to talk. So, yeah, but it was because all of us, and I had seen the film probably 30, 40 times and never noticed it.
Yeah. I always feel like I'm almost blind when I'm watching a movie or when I'm cutting a movie. There's so many things I don't see. For example, Mark and I were cutting a movie. We've seen the scene 50 times. And we just like randomly pause at the screen and we're like, wait a minute, you're not wearing a jacket in this shot. Go back. Oh, you're wearing a jacket here? You're not wearing a jacket here. And then you're wearing a jacket here.
And that's how you end up with Starbucks cups in the, on set that make it all the way to broadcast.
Yeah. And we left it in because we're like, it's like, no, it hasn't bugged us and we've never heard about it. So yeah, I'm very blind to these things.
Courtney has a question.
Yeah, do you cut to the Starbucks cup to allow the character to have time to change his clothes? I know what you're talking about. Starbucks cup in a period movie.
Do they have a resolution to cut to?
Yes. What I was wondering is, in a highly dramatic cut, how often? And I know usually the edit is completed before the composer gets it to do the score. How often do you work hand in hand with the score, especially on a film that is a very dramatic film where a lot of the drama and the emotion is carried by the composer and the soundtrack, the music track? Do you work with them to extend a cut, let's say, to allow time for the music to build an emotion, or do you just finish your cut, leave it, base it on the expressions on the actors' faces, et cetera, to convey the emotion, and then let the composer compose and accentuate that, or do you work hand in hand and go back and forth?
This is a really interesting question, and I'm not a purist. So there's two different camps to editors. The purist is like, don't cut to music at all. Don't put music in. Just cut the picture first. I am not that editor. I love music, and I find the music before I cut a scene to that extent. Like I find a temp score, I start cutting the scene, and then I'll take the score out again and make sure it kind of works on its own. The one thing that I try to really convince the director is, let us never show this cut with the temp score to the composer with the score. Let's please pull the score out before we give it to the composer. Because more often than not, I cut to Requiem for a Dream, and then I give my film to this composer, and I'm like, wait a minute, this sounds like Requiem for a Dream. Even though
you have too much impact.
Even though we don't have rights to Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
So it started really bugging me that I would hear the temp track in there, because I could just sense, even though we tell them we don't care what the score is, you find your own way. And these are good these are really high-end composers. I still feel like I'm hearing the temp. And so if possible, I love to cut with music, and then I'll take it out completely before I give it to sound.
We have a bunch of questions that are starting to pack up, so let's dive into our first question. Alexander?
John Foltz from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania asks, when using your OK Good Gold method, do you ever drop a clip on the SLX timeline and use the blade shortcut instead of using in and out?
I don't. It's very interesting. That's a very inside question. I have a certain way of how I select shots where they're on different video layers, depending on how good I like or how much I like this moment. So the gold moment is higher. And I actually have shortcuts for the way that I do it. So when I watch the dailies for the very first time, I do very quick in and out of what I think is a moment. So like a take will have 20, 30 moments in there, which is like a look, a line, a reaction, a sound, whatever. That's a moment. And then I'll decide whether I think this is a good moment, or it's just an okay moment, or it's gold. And then I just have a shortcut here on my monogram, and then it cuts it into the timeline on the right video layer. And it immediately starts continuing to play. So once I've sort of figured out all these macros, so how to optimize that, it's actually the fastest way for me to look at dailies and take note of how I feel emotionally when I see it for the very first time. Because I only kind of see it one time, and I can know how I feel about that moment at that time. And I want to preserve that feeling visually in the timeline when I do my selects.
Let's go on to the next question.
Next question's from Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies. Any simple advice on how to get into video editing? I'm good with the basics of tools like wondershare, etc. I own and use Atem Extreme ISO, so I'm thinking Resolve is necessary to learn for ISO. How would you guys approach learning starting all over?
Yeah, so I would suggest don't worry too much about the tools. There's a bunch of stuff that's for free. I would say always be working. So find something that you can cut for somebody else that is real. It could be like a reel for a cameraman that's your buddy. It could be an actor's reel. It could be something else where you just always be cutting. And hopefully, as you continue working, these projects become more and more exciting. Because as you are working, work always attracts more work. You will get more opportunities, and then you pick the ones that are more exciting, and then you work towards kind of leveraging up to bigger and better projects.
Yeah, I have to say that's been my experience too. There is no substitute for actually doing work. And even if no one's going to hire you from doing work, if you really want to get good at this stuff, whatever it is, you just have to figure out how to get projects to come in. You have to do them yourself. You have to go out and shoot your own little resume films or whatever. But if you're not sitting there editing something, you're not making progress as an editor. That's always been my experience. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question's from Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. What are your essential plugins for video transitions or effects?
What's your feeling about transitions, Sven?
I like transitions. I mean, I used to cut a lot of sizzles and trailers for reality shows for a good amount of like 5 years. And I love transitions. So I don't use them in like the stuff I'm doing when I cut a feature. But my go-to plugin is actually Badass by, I think his name is Arthur Moore. He's a YouTuber, and he created a package for Final Cut. It's maybe like $40, $50, and every transition is like the best transition I've ever, like I'm constantly using them because he's using them themselves. He's developed them for his YouTube channel. And I can highly recommend just checking out Atem more on YouTube.
Nice. Hey, you do not only editing of features and that kind of thing. That's kind of one mind space, but you also have to work on producing your channel content, which is kind of a different, more educational space. You talk about kind of how you approach those differently, and so many people are editing these days, but so many different kinds of things. And how do you figure out what's the appropriate style for a different kind of project style?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's so different to cut a feature film versus a YouTube video. It's always how to tell a story that engages an audience. Having said that, there are a little bit different styles. 3 acts versus YouTube is like hook, stakes, story. So you're trying to rope them in. Then you really make sure they understand why this video matters to them. And then you start telling your story. If you get that right, then you have a better chance of this video being picked up by the algorithm because the audience tends to hang on and want to watch till the end. But when it comes to the actual storytelling, it's always like, how can I tease something that matters to them? How do I delay the answer to the end? How do I make sure that a story is plausible yet surprising? That's very important. Oftentimes stories are maybe plausible, but they're totally predictable. And that happens on the greatest movies you'll see in theaters. You're like, I just watched this movie. It was a great experience, but I saw it coming like 45 minutes ago. And that's what you want to avoid. Or you tell something that makes no sense, where it's like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, you set up these rules, but you're breaking them, and now I'm completely frustrated. So figuring these parts out is what's really important, and that doesn't change whether it's a YouTube video or a movie.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I watched the first National Treasure movie, and as soon as they lit toward the end of the movie, the big climax, right? And he throws a torch into something behind the big gigantic rock faces, and it all lights up. And for the rest of the time the whole movie ran, I was going, how did that work? It's been sitting there unseen by human beings for 150 years, and he throws a torch in it, and it explodes like it just came out of the gas station down the road. I'm not buying that, and it lost the entire rest of the movie for me. So those continuity things, I think it was really interesting what you said, that sometimes, even if you know intellectually it's a continuity problem, if you're telling the story in a compelling way, people will not see them. And is that something you can only tell? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the majority will not see them. You will always have, I don't know, 10, 15% who will see this, and it bugs them. But it's not the majority. Like, I'm cutting for the majority, and I'm cutting for an emotional experience for them.
Perfect. Let's go on to the next question.
Yeah.
The next question is from me. How does someone get to your level? Do you have to make your own short films and learn editing as you go and hope to get noticed? How do you get to feature films and TV series?
Simple question.
So, well, I had to make a radical choice, which was I directed my own feature film so that I can edit it. So that's one way of doing it, is you just create your own stuff. And then once I had this credit, I could call myself a feature film editor. There's so many ways how you can get to that level. Assisting used to be a very valid way of doing it, just like finding an opportunity to work with professionals that you really look up to and making yourself really useful, valuable, and fun to hang out with. And they will help you get to the next stage in your career. That's one way. I think the third way nowadays is new media, TikTok, YouTube, all these things. Even though you can kind of look down upon them and say, oh, this is just like easy consumption for mass audience, I think there's so many opportunities to tell stories that are interesting. There's so many interesting creators on YouTube that are full-on filmmakers. Life of Rizzer is one of those. She started a year ago, and she's turning vlogs into just movies. It's like every shot storyboarded, beautifully thought out. She always has a money shot in there, and she's just, whatever happens in her life, it becomes a movie. And she she is using that medium to connect to an audience, and in a year or two, she will probably can make her own movie, and she doesn't even have to look at a studio or a distributor to release it. She can just do whatever she wants to do.
Yeah, there's never been more alternate openings for getting into things, but I think you would agree that you still have to put in the hard work to get there. Nobody sits down the first time and organically figures out how to cut a great scene or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You need to do some study first. Let's go to the next question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I sucked as an editor for 5 years.
Amen, brother. Amen.
I was working. Like, people were paying me money so that I could learn. Like, my first job was working for James Cameron. And the only reason I got this job was because I was doing something like a webcast. Then I was doing a webcast for him. And then I was cutting some stuff on Final Cut. He was curious. And it was never that he asked me to do another project. I ended up cutting one of his 3D IMAX movies. It wasn't because I had the skills to do it, actually. It was more like I had the stamina, I had a great attitude, and I'm willing to learn. And I wouldn't take anything personally. And these are the skills that really help me work with people. It's never because I'm actually qualified. I'm never qualified to do the next thing. That comes while I'm doing the project.
Yeah, that's really an interesting perspective. That human relationship thing is probably as much a part of this as skills. There are a lot of people who know how to technically cut anything, but are you a good hang? That's how I heard it described over and over again. It's like, do I want to spend time with you? Because we're going to spend a lot of time in a room by ourselves in the dark watching these things. And if I can't hang with you, that's not a good circumstance. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But putting in your 10,000 hours is important. I agree.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, next question.
Next question is from Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. Are you often consulted when the project is doing reshoots?
What about post? Where do you stop being involved?
I do a lot of consulting, more so now than ever. So I actually consult on shows that I'm not cutting and give notes, that kind of stuff. But I do also consult when we need reshoots, more so on documentaries, because you're really writing the documentary in the editing, you're finding the story more in the editing, and you're picking up a lot of interviews and things that you need to sort of finish the film. And that's very closely, you're working with the director and the producer and the writer on that. I remember I was cutting one documentary for Michael Bolton about Detroit, and I was sitting with the writer in the writer's room for probably, I don't know, a month before we actually started cutting, just like going through the footage and writing how the story will unfold before we were actually putting it into the timeline.
Yeah, I find documentaries really fascinating. That idea of not having a script and having to find the story in the footage it's very interesting to me. Let's go on to the next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, educational content on YouTube is hugely popular. How has the paradigm shifted to giving away insights, techniques, and hard-earned lessons versus a long-standing notion to withhold information from potential future competition?
So I think information is everywhere, and information is pretty much for free. So you don't have to pay somebody to get informed. What you're paying for is to help you get results. So I think we see, like, online courses was a big thing right around COVID, maybe even a little bit earlier, and now it's dying off. And I think what we've learned is it's not enough to just tell people what the insights are. It's actually helping them experience them themselves and then get better at their craft. So we're massively transitioning into coaching, where we take whatever we're teaching and we're guiding them to the point where we're like weekly accountability. Like, are you showing up? Are you doing the exercises? And then what is the creative process? How can we help you, give you better feedback on that? And that's where the value really comes in. Like, anybody can cut without buying any course and can do it on their own, but most won't. And that's where the value add comes with teachers and mentors and coaches.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Mickey McChore in Manila, Philippines. What advice can you give to AEs and others who aspire to become an editor?
Can you talk through the process of an assistant editor and what they do a little bit, and then tell us what advice you give people?
Yeah, so an assistant editor used to be somewhat creative. You kind of used to be a partner to the editor, helping them. You used to often share office. That's not the case mostly anymore. It's become a very technical job. So you're helping in the sense that you're getting the footage in, you're ingesting it, you're syncing it, you're checking that everything is there, you're sorting, grouping, what have you. But you're not involved in the creative process as much anymore. And so it gets harder and harder for an assistant to move up. It's still possible, but I was working on TV shows where we had 7 assistants. And there was maybe one person that was actually creatively inclined and would actually say, hey, I want to learn. And there were 6 assistant editors who were like, I'm good. I just need to do this. And I'm doing already 12 hours a day. And this is all that I can handle right now. So then it depends on the editor to be open to that. And usually I tend to be very open to including assistants in the creative process. I ask them to do string outs for me, to do rough cuts, to do first takes on things that I don't get to. And let then the producer know that, okay, this scene was actually the idea came from my assistant. And you should sort of hope for this opportunity that will come along when you're working on a TV show that has a season 1, season 2, and one of the editors moves on to another project. They tend to want to hire from within first before they bring in a new editor. If I am the editor and I have a really strong relationship with my assistant, I could say, hey, I think we should give this guy a try. He might be ready or she might be ready. And why don't we give them a test episode or give them an act and see how it goes? And then hopefully you can transition, get a couple of those episodes in, and then you're an editor.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. In addition to the Arthur Moore plugins, could you please recommend other Final Cut Pro plugins?
What have you surveyed out in the gigantic morass of plugins out there?
I have a couple, but I'm not going to recommend them because I never use them. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Let me get this. And then they're so complicated that it's almost not worth it learning them as I need to apply them. Or I do apply them for this one thing and then I never use them again and I forget how they work. So I don't really use all that much in addition to what we have. I mean, I use Frame.io and I use Badass for Final Cut. That's it.
I'm not at all surprised. I mean, the plugin world is so deep, and sometimes you can get one plugin and it's got 38 buried menus with 275 choices inside those buried menus, and then you just go, this is too complicated. I just need to do something simple, so I'll use it this one time and then I'll put it away. I've found myself in that same kind of circumstance. Let's move to the next question.
Next question is from Jay Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. Have you ever suggested a shot to a director which would enhance the scene in the midst of an edit but was not planned for?
I would suggest shots if we're still in production. If there's opportunity to get them or get them on the next scene or when I'm in a script meeting, I would suggest shots. But I really, really try to tell the story with what I have. So I'm not necessarily pushing for pickups ever, because I feel like you should be able to tell the story with what you have. And oftentimes the story that is limited by the restrictions that you have becomes more interesting. Because now for example, we had a scene where they unfortunately erased the camera card. So I was missing a close-up on one actor. And I was cutting the scene, making a point that this is actually intentional, that we don't see her face in the scene. She's more distant, whatever, disconnected. And I showed the scene to the director without telling them that I didn't have a close-up. And he loved it. He was like, oh, this is so great. I'm feeling this. Nice choice. Moving on.
Love it. Courtney, you had a follow-up in there?
Yeah. Have you ever had to use a cutaway from another scene that you could get away with if you needed a reaction shot or some transition from one actor to the other from something that wasn't even shot within that scene to use as a transition to get you out of a difficult situation like a continuity error? So.
Yeah, more often than not, I use stuff that wasn't actually intended in a scene. It could be like they already said cut, and the camera still keeps rolling. I use reaction shots of that, or before they even start rolling, usually there's a moment where the actors focus, where they like get into the zone, and often there's something really interesting happening there. Or I use it from a completely different scene. I blow in, so I can't really tell in terms of the background or so. That's different. In reality show or documentary, we would use that all the time.
That brings up something. In order to do that, you have to understand what's kind of on the cutting room floor from the AE stage if they are giving you selects. Do you kind of force yourself to go through all the material, even if you have an assistant editor who might be culling things out?
Yeah, I do all my selects. Like I watch every frame. So
there you go.
I have the editors do. The assistant editors do string outs or like do B-roll fishing, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I do my own select. So I know what I have most of the time. And the way that I sort it with those 3 layers, it's a very good system.
Nice. Let's go to the next question.
Mickey Makachor from Manila, Philippines asks, what is your preference in how you want your AEs to build and organize your bins?
It's associated with what we were just talking about. Sven, what's your process?
Yeah, so first of all, shout out to Emma Dupel, who's I want to say my favorite assistant because she is. What I love about her is that she is anticipating problems before I even see them coming. So being super proactive is one way. And then, I sort of tell her what my way is of how I like my bins to be set up, how I want thumbnails of each shot. And I'm going to do my own select reel in that bin. But she kind of already sort of preps it to a certain way that I really like. But it's more the stuff that I don't even know, that I don't even understand. Like the syncing, the grouping, the getting it in and making sure we got everything that was shot and nothing got lost and everything is in sync. These are the things that are really, really cherished, where I don't have to worry about any of this.
So if you shot MOS and have separate soundtracks, she's going to put them together into a usable scene that the audio is as close to final without looping and the rest of that stuff as possible. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, I mean, if a shot is MOS, then it's MOS. But if there's like some syncing to be done, but the time code is off and the clapper, then she needs to, or there's even no clapper. We've had that also. Like they recorded audio, there was no audio on the camera, so there was nothing to match. So she has to really like find it. Has to like, okay, I just heard somebody put down a cup. Now let me find in the audio track if I can hear the clunk of the cup. And that's then the only way you can sync that shot. So that kind of stuff she would do.
Nice. Next question.
Next question's from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What are your thoughts on test screenings?
You were talking about that earlier, so you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love testing a film. I'm not a big fan of forums and discussions, so I would never suggest to the director to ask them, so how did you like it? Was there anything confusing? Is there a certain scene that was really boring to you? I would say disregard all that. Just sitting with them, picking up their energy, making sure it's not a friendly audience. So don't do friends, do strangers.
Oh, don't do a group that'll applaud at anything or laugh at anything because they like you. Yes.
Exactly. That's the worst. If you like watch a film with a director and his buddies, and everybody's like, "Oh, this really moved me. I mean, this is your best work." I was tearing up, and I mean, I'm sitting there like, "Yeah, this is bullshit. This is not going to help." Oh, sorry.
No, we've all been there. A lot of us have been there, and we understand exactly what you're saying. Let's go on to the next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles asks, how would you describe your overall editing style?
Ooh, interesting question, Sven.
I would say it's effective. Like there is no one way that I cut. It's all determined by the story, by the characters. And my main goal is to get to the core of what it is as effectively as possible. So it doesn't mean it has to be fast. It needs to be impactful. So sometimes that would require being very stylistic, and sometimes it would be required to be very traditional in the sense of editing.
Nice. Go to the next question.
Mickey McAjor in Manila, Philippines asks, what's your biggest pet peeves of AEs?
Have you had to not work with an assistant editor because they just didn't do something that felt comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had experiences where I'm like, okay, this is a one-off. We're not going to continue to another project. It's usually, there's a couple of red flags. One is talking too much, like oversharing, having to explain certain things over and over again. And I don't see change. I have no problem with people not having experience. I always value potential over experience, but they do need to pick it up. I'm not here necessarily to spend 30% of my time teaching and reteaching. When we're cutting a movie, I'm trying to find somebody who's going to help me get there faster so that I can be better.
Does the word trust comes to mind? Are you looking for people you trust to do their part of this and not interfere with anybody else trying to get their part done?
Yeah, totally. I mean, trust. I need to trust them that what they give me is basically technically in perfect condition, and there's nothing missing.
There you go. Next question.
Next question is from Courtney Gooden in Hollywood, California. How do you feel about AI or machine learning tools that are finding their way into editing platforms? Useful or fearful?
Definitely not fearful. I mean, I want to be replaced by AI because that means I can do more things. I'm skeptical that we're anywhere close to a point where it's really helpful creatively. There's some selecting and happy accidents, new ideas that you can get through assisted AI. But when it comes to really like directing AI and say, okay, I like what you've done here, keep this, change this. It's very hard for AI to execute these even simple directions to make a change that really like makes it better and better and better. So that is a huge problem, I think, that they haven't solved in the video world yet.
Nice. Next question.
Next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. As post time gets compressed, assistant editors have less time to learn the craft of editing. How do you learn the craft, and how is it best taught to young editors?
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be always time to cut things on the side. Sometimes it would probably require a little bit of moonlighting or so, or coming in early if you wanted to work on a scene as an assistant. But the biggest challenge I see is because of these compressed schedules and these intense workflows that they have to execute on, is that they're just creatively just not fresh. They're just very, very just getting through the day is so hard. So my suggestion would be, and this is what I did as an editor too, is while I was working on TV, I would do a show for 3 months and then I would take 3 months off and just recover and like creatively recharge. So if you are in that position where you can maybe take some time off in between projects to like creatively recharge and maybe work on some indie stuff, do a short, these kind of things, I think this is ultimately where you're going to help yourself transition and pivot.
Good advice. Next question.
Mickey McAjor in Manila, Philippines asks, do you break down a narrative script prior to receiving the material? If so, what is your process?
I don't, but I've seen other editors do it where they go through line by line and define what the story turns are. And then they cut these turns and they cut variations of each one with different alternative takes. I've never really done it to that point. I really just look at the footage. I'm looking like, okay, which is the best close-up, or which is the moment that I want to get to, and then I start with those gold moments and put them in a timeline. And then often how I tell the story is defined by these gold moments. Oftentimes I don't need the in-between transition moment that gets us from A to B, because the audience is so smart. And because I put two gold moments next to each other, they immediately create new meaning that's even more interesting than what we all sort of planned, just accidentally. So I really love this sort of process of discovery through putting stuff on the timeline.
Have you ever had a circumstance where most of the performances are really solid, but there's one performance that's not, and you had to kind of cut around that? And how do you deal with that if you have to?
I have, and it happens all the time, that one actor is weaker than the others, so they get less screen time. A lot of lines get removed. They get a lot of reaction shots. So yeah, I also flip lines around sometimes. So even though it was scripted like line 1, line 2, I do line 2, line 1. And that makes an interesting, like, oh, interesting.
That's interesting. It's almost like a split edit, but with the dialogue actually coming a line before the other line.
Yeah, it works all the time. It just creates like surprise and interest. And it just throws the audience a little bit and makes it more interesting. So there's a lot of tricks how editors can shape an actor's performance. Actually, Kubrick said that the editor has more power over the performance than the actor themselves.
Fascinating. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, when you watch movies, how do you shift from enjoying a movie as a spectator to analyzing the storytelling and technique of the editor? Does one mode get in the way of the other?
After editing for so long, do you find yourself diving out of the movie mentally and looking at the editing, or can you just dive into it and forget about that stuff?
I said this before, I tend to be blind when I watch things. And maybe that's really a skill set of an editor, is that they are a little blind. Like when I watch a movie, I'm not thinking about editing. If it's a good movie, I'm completely engrossed in the film. And if it's a bad movie, I might notice some things where I'm like, oh, this is why it's bad. Like, this is just a really bad choice right here, or takes too long. You could have cut right here. But with most of the time, I don't pay attention to the editing, and I don't have to make myself. I'm just experiencing the film.
Got one more question.
All right, this one comes from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. Have you developed an uncanny skill for visual/aural recall since becoming an editor?
What does that mean? I'm not sure I understand.
I suppose to be able to kind of see the scenes that you've previewed and kind of know where to go get the stuff that you need. Would that be what he's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. I also developed a skill where I already cut the scene in my mind after having seen the dailies. So what I usually do is I watch the dailies in the afternoon, do my selects, and then the next day when I come back, I went on a run, I took a shower, whatever. I already subconsciously built the scene in my head, and I can just then start executing. But then new ideas come immediately when I'm like, oh, I see this, I see that. But there's a lot of like pre-planning happening, and this wasn't the way when I started editing. There was a lot of recutting and questioning, and it took me a very long time at the beginning to get something where I felt like, I think this is good. Well, now I'm like, I see it this way, I cut it this way, I'm going to show it to the director and see if it's any good.
Sven, we've been at it for an hour. We're at the end of the show. It has been so much fun having you here to talk about this stuff. Thank you so much for coming in. Any last thing you want to say to anybody? Anything you want to promote or whatever before we dive out?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, I do want to point out, if you're interested in this selecting process with the different levels, I have a free mini course under secreteditinghacks.com. you can watch it. It's like a 25-minute way where I select an entire scene of a feature film. You can see how I do it.
Thanks so much for coming in today. We have had a great show. Thank you all for being here. Our thanks, as always, to our three major constituents, those of you who are watching, our producers, and who are putting the questions in here really that drive our show for the entire 2 hours. Thank you so much for all the great suggestions you make through that process. For the panelists who have been here adding their expertise, particularly in the first hour when we spend all of our time trying to solve people's problems about how all this technology works, thank you to you. And for our incredible behind-the-scenes cast, people literally all over the globe. This is being touched in real time by people an amazing distance apart. They all have their hands in this live show, and we've done it now 1,500 and some odd times, and haven't missed a day in the past 4 years. Our traversal today, clock traversal, we've done 101,000 miles. If you'd wanted this information and had gone to everybody who participated in this show, you have had to travel 100,000 miles plus. That's 162,000 kilometers. And the equivalent, 798 million bananas for scale. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Sven.
Thank you. This was fun.
It was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a great time. I think great show.
Oh, that's great. I'm very impressed with like this whole setup.
Well,
you can
it's
watch it back on YouTube and criticize our editing.
Well, this was live switched, so I don't know where the TD is in the world today, but somewhere on the planet, sitting with an iPad probably, cutting the show.
Someone's pressing
Texas.
buttons somewhere.
Okay, it's being done out of Texas today.
Okay.
Oh, you don't even know who's switching the show?
No.
It changes day to day.
That's great.
Literally, it could be anybody. Mickey's doing sound in Manila in the Philippines. It could be London. Who knows? This group of global people gets together every day and makes this show happen.
That's incredible. And it's all Zoom, or are you still like? Remember, you recommended me to Obvio, who like works with Zoom